Ashwin, go ahead. Welcome everybody to this fantastic webinar coming out of UMass Lowell and the team from there. So over to you, Ashwin.
Thank you, Dr. Krishna Badula, and welcome all to the Global Entrepreneurship Education Webinar Series presented by University of Massachusetts Lowell in collaboration with RUCE. Today's webinar topic is Family Business in 2021. Family historically represents approximately 80% of the worldwide economy. Senator Patrick Abu-Shalash will constantly evolving global family business and investment demands and how the entrepreneurship education should address these topics. Patrick has over 20 years of experience as an entrepreneur, investor, teacher, and mentor. His global family business, office, institutional, and nonprofit career spans a variety of industries, including hospitality, consumer education, technology, business services, and real estate. He is the founder and managing director of the Pegasus Group, a Boston and New York-based investment and advisory firm. Patrick's active teaching and community involvement includes mentoring undergraduates and graduates, international students, military veterans, and working adults across cultures and backgrounds, as well as raising awareness and funding for many nonprofits. Patrick is also an adjunct faculty at Boston University, where he teaches innovation and entrepreneurship across multiple colleges. Please welcome Patrick Abu-Shalash. Patrick?
Ashwin and Krishna, respectively, good morning and good evening. And to all of you in different corners of the globe, I'm more thankful than none on technology, as I think it brings us closer together. And it's not for everyone. Equally also, family business from innovation through investments are not for everyone. But if we look at historically, I look forward to hopefully spending a colloquial 60 minutes together, where I'll do a little bit background on myself and some of my observations. And more interestingly, I love the Q&A side. Look forward to meeting as many of you as possible and really talking more about what's most important to you, whether in your family business, in your classroom, in your personal or professional investment portfolios. And as all these pieces are tied to the most important word in life, I think community and values and sustainability. For UMass, Dr. Richtermeyer, Ashwin, Yi, Krishna, it's a pleasure to be with all of you. And with that, to faculty, alumni, and partners on the call, let's get started. I thought, I talk a lot about relationships. Got a computer in front of me. I wish I could see you all. But let me start off with a little of this the simplified nature versus nurture. Who is this guy, rather than just jumping into a content area? But also a little bit about myself. And marhaba, I'm part Lebanese, but also buonasera, I'm part Italian. Grew up in this country called Lebanon. Spent some time a little further west on the Mediterranean in a beautiful village on the sea called Nice. I could say, hey, weren't we all Phoenicians, or didn't we all grow up in the same part of the world, wherever that was centuries ago? Along those lines, we all take our own individual roadmaps and journey. Part of that, we're still living in our hometown. Others, for a variety of reasons, move around the globe, no different, as I heard a little bit more about Krishna and Ashwin's most recent movements. But when I was in grade school, I grew up in a family business, and with things going a little more roller coaster in Lebanon, in '81, we moved to New York City. Many years later, I had the good news in pre-internet on getting an admission letter to go study in Philadelphia at the University of Pennsylvania, where we talk and we teach and we mentor in innovation. Here's one of many inventors with Mr. Franklin. Then I started my career off at the World Bank. Incredible, the ability to work with family businesses, privatizations in all parts of the developing world. I was coming back home. If only some of my work in Africa or Indonesia or Venezuela took me back to Lebanon. Sustainability of those efforts. Went back to the classroom, finished my education at NSEAD, took all those entrepreneurship classes I didn't have a chance to take at Wharton as an undergrad. And then look, I met a Bostonian in New York. We got married, and here you are, as you so often in life, follow your partner. I'm in year 5 in this wonderful ecosystem called Greater Boston or New England. And as Ashwin was kind enough to mention, I'm back in education at the forefront of my day as a teacher, as a mentor, as a coach from BU, where I'm an adjunct teaching innovation and entrepreneurship and family business, but across multiple schools in the greater Boston, New England area. And what a rich, call it the nurture side, whether it's historically a lot of family businesses coming out of tech and healthcare and real estate, but also this resurgence of New England and ag, different versions of science, the Boston and as an epicenter for more social impact or sustainability or ESG, but in an actionable way, not just branding a label on our sweatshirt. Label and words, as we talk this morning or evening, mean nothing in life. Let's start off a little bit on family business. And I mentioned the importance of values and communities. We're all different. We all have different personal heritages, traditions, where we're from. I can't have 3 hometowns. I only have 1 hometown. That hometown may change over time. But I just wanted to, as I'm moving my cursor, moving a little bit I like to demystify words like family business. And family business is most of us, as Ashwin was mentioning, a couple of minutes ago, depending on the stats, is it 80% of global business? And isn't it everywhere? And what would the statistics look like if we were able to go back 10 centuries or 15 centuries? But in more modern times, a 45, 46 generation ryokan hospitality family out of Japan, still family owned, and where succession means continuing to preserve the core product experience to guests from all over Japan or Asia or the world. To, as some of you on the other side of the globe, you probably know a lot of these really bright and diverse families in India, as they're serial entrepreneurs, not to use words to, aren't we all? But then let me bring home a little bit more of my personal upbringing. I still have family in France, an 1860 brand called La Durée, this simple product in multiple colors and textures called the macaron that started off in a tea house, whether an airport in Paris or a decade ago, a bunch of millennials and lining up the street in the Upper East Side to buy a box or many boxes, still family owned as they grow in different formats in different corners of the world in major cities. But then let me cross the Hudson, a 1910 bakery in Hoboken called Carlo's that has grown nationally. They came from Italy, 4th generation. Oh my gosh, are they hugging? Are they fighting? If you're Italian or if you're Indian or as you're from so many warm cultures that we're from, it's not easy. But how do you keep the peace in an actionable matter where I like to extend family going back to just beyond the generation or the generations to everybody involved from a stakeholder theory? It's your oldest and youngest employee. It's your suppliers. Let's not forget the community, the users that you're helping from a nonprofit, for-profit, or both. And then from a historical perspective, on the other side of my family, this is a small photo of an old department store in Philadelphia that doesn't exist anymore as Macy's bought it. All these industries change, and your surroundings of the business or the businesses or the nonprofit or the investment center can also change as families get bigger and they shrink. You enter, you exit, you're full-time, you're part-time. And then also this resurgence of the CSA agricultural model, not only in the US, in New England, my new adopted home, where young farmers in such states as Vermont and New Hampshire and are among top 10 states in percentage of new farmers, but equally going back to other parts of the world, both developed and developing, and where also none of us asked for the last 12 months from this force majeure called the pandemic, but it's also brought additional tailwinds to family farming from first timers, and by that definition, by first timers. Have you been around now a year since you graduated from UMass Lowell or from any school, all the way up to the old 400-year families? But let's move on. Family business, private equity, growth equity, social impact, ESG. I don't want to use words at all with you on this first conversation, on hopefully subsequent conversations as you form relationships. From I'm in my mid 40s, as I was a kid in the early 80s, globally, Dallas or Dynasty, to a more recent, call it millennial or Gen Z focused successful movie, to a global family, multi-generationals from Australia to England to the US in this media empire. Oh my gosh, family business is still everywhere, notwithstanding some seasons that have been on a halt just because film schedules or seasons were delayed. The Roys of HBO, really, really aggressive, more Mac the Knife type of screenwriting. But let's go from a little bit more the words of, call it chaos and things change and kindness, from this wonderful family called the Roses that has really Canadian or American, call it origins, if we were to go off screen from all the families involved, let alone from the Levies, where 3 members of the original family were involved in creating the show, but were also part of the show. I did not want to see the seasons end. And by that, just examples of where continuity and values and doing good matter. But let's go a little bit more and leave Hollywood behind, or Bollywood, and go to the mainstream infatuation with family business. And you look at all these fancy presentations where sometimes we see the word rich, but I'm going to go back. I graduated with an economics degree, but I'm still horrible with numbers, and that's by design. We're talking about most of the world is involved in family business, and where success is not a number, or it's not a bank account, or it's not a volume, or how many stores, or how many licenses over one generation or multiple generation you prioritized. You define your success, no different from a mochi business in Japan, where they stayed very small. And from a succession level, as they keep on passing the baton with a lot of female or heads of the family who are matriarchs, serving one's community, where we're going to be around the next generation and the next 10 generations, rather than being national or global. And you determine that. And then you see other words. How many of us, where the pandemic and Zoom haven't stopped that, we get these invitations from individuals we don't know. Here's a family office and crowdfunding conference. Or you're reading the journal, the new force on Wall Street, the family office. Are we in this because we love our craft from a discretion? Or are we in there because we've never worked in business? We've never taught, we've never invested, and we just want to go from the starting line to the finish line overnight, and we just want credits, and we want to get 2 more million Instagram followers by the time this call is done. And then equally within that, as we talk a little bit more about these other stakeholders, wealth management firms, RIAs, are they a startup? Are they buying one another? I don't know this person on the other end who's just sending me a cold email that they're just sending on their own or through Salesforce campaign to all of you in this room. Do they introduce themselves? I wish we could teach that empathy of what relationships really mean in the classroom or applied. And then, like, there's a little, I studied Latin, caveat emptor. You have to watch out that, you know, slick salesman or saleswoman. Really, really be careful as you have all these stakeholders. And it's so important to get to know each other, do your homework before you make business decisions or before you make investment and philanthropic or academic decisions. We'll start off with the 101 on family business. I talked a little about these words. You meet one family, you've met one family. They get bigger, they get smaller. Sometimes we're privileged where we have many generations that are still living together in that same adopted town or in that same apartment building, whether it's in Mumbai or Caracas or in Beirut, but you can still maintain culture and values even when we're in different corners of the world, even when we're on a GoTo or Zoom screen. And then which families have the foresight to be able to better manage intergenerational needs, the ability to adopt empathy, to take a step back, to listen to everyone around the table, to share experiences, personal, professional, life lessons, to listen to needs early, not late, and then keep the peace as we would in any relationship. And in any relationship where I look at it as a minimum, two people are involved, and we can go sometimes from two people, or in the cases of my own family, where we're still a couple hundred of us, but we're only a few of us in the US. Most are in Europe and Lebanon, which, yes, even before Zoom, you know, of course, those dynamics are improved if you're face to face, but it can still work, and it can still work if everybody's aligned and thoughtful ahead of time. And we'll talk a little later about governance and how governance from keeping the peace as we look at owners and who's in the family business and who's in the family, who's not in the family, who marries into the family, who might be part of the family today and sometimes might leave the family and get remarried and join somebody else's families. It's the same tenets from keeping it simple, no different as we work together in academia, as academics, as practitioners, and most importantly, where as teachers, we're learning from our students, you know, who's got the better side of the relationship. I think we do. And I say that with a lot of humility. But let's start off with the first unit, the innovation side. We all work together in different pieces of academics, and whether that's different specialities from our research to our teaching, but these different pieces all matter as we're all innovators. Some in public schools, other in private schools, some in very small private schools which are focused only on the arts, others in UMass Lowell or BU or Penn, where we're teaching multiple disciplines, cross schools in multiple campi, domestically or different corners of the world. No different where I've had the pleasure of getting to know Ashwin and Krishna and different members of your team and your patients as we're traversing so many time zones this morning or evening. But you look at innovation, and you'll excuse me for being redundant, but always going back to that simplicity of taking existing ideas and redesigning or recombining, as my wife or as my students constantly reminding me, and keeping it simple. But more importantly, within a family context, irrespective of whether you're a one-year family business or you have a couple of centuries of history and are a lot more complex from the operating, investment, and philanthropic sides, the ability, as you're looking at innovation, the ability to address it against internal or external, and who is involved. And within who is involved, is it one or more members of the family that is raising their hand and taking the lead on one or two businesses, new businesses, not 10 new businesses, not 10 new board seats or charities, versus how do you break that down from a team approach where if I need to bring and hire somebody and start a hiring process and doing that in a very transparent fashion, from bringing the right external members and bringing them from a continuity where we want them to be around for many decades, where they become part of the family, but in a very objective, discerning way, rather than from a nepotistic or non-transparent fashion. And then there's the external side. Some of you on this call are parents or grandparents. You might have one of your youngest or oldest who are in, are freshmen or seniors. And guess what? They've never wanted to be in the family business. They don't want to join the manufacturing business. They don't want to join the investment business. They want to go to med school. They want to become a lawyer. They want to start the next social justice nonprofit or go to law school and eventually make it their way to the DOJ or the equivalent in all of our home countries. Again, there's no one roadmap. I'm not going to give you a generalized diagnosis or prescription. And we're going to touch upon, again, governance and succession and alignment. A wonderful professor, Professor Eisenhart, we're talking again, the ability to sit down, and it hurts. And sometimes, depending on the day, when I was young, I didn't want to hear from my elders. Still today, sometimes I can be stubborn if I'm having a bad day. I don't want to hear constructive criticism from somebody who always wants my good. But I'm not a stubborn fellow, and my students aren't stubborn. But the ability around the table, if I can use that analogy, of the ability to accept, diverge, and then converge, as we're able to always listen to the constructive criticism, the negative feedback first, as other members of the family in a meaningful way that they want our best interest, share with them, listen. They don't judge immediately. Then they empathetically share experience, lessons learned, and as we work it out. And I bring in, again, from a great reading, Professor Eisenhart's tips, and from values, again, to the ability to address a little humor, where life is boring if we're always talking shop from breakfast to dinner, or equally within many of us on this phone call. It's so important to also have that personal relationship. When I'm done with work with different members of my family, or even my partner, we don't speak about work. We don't look at our screen. It's so important to keep things different. I'm giving one personal perspective. That doesn't mean that I'm giving the right advice. Every family is different. And within that aspect, until you've listened and you've gotten to know one as an internal member of my own family, or as an advisor, or as a teacher, I can't prescribe until I've built that trust and gotten to know one another. And I get a lot of phone calls from people that I don't know. And I take a step back, because I am the slowest person on the screen. Let's get to know each other better and see if this is meaningful, from talking about a long-term relationship with leveraging that trust and complementary skill sets. We can do more than one thing together, or as a baseball fan, continue to hit those singles and doubles, rather than this making a short-term Band-Aid where life is too short, just sharing one individual's perspectives from the North Shore of Boston. And then equally, from another academic, another tool that I like to use, building on Professor Eisenhart's brilliance, keeping it simple. We've got family members, we've got non-family members, and then some cases we have the blur. And these three pieces of ownership, family, and business, it can get very complicated as we look at the overlap. But I just wanted to share this as another simple tool that many of you have set. And sometimes when I'm talking to new seniors or year 2 or year 3 graduate students that are off the record are sharing with me, their, challenges of saying, Patrick, I love my family and I grew up in the family business, but I'm in my 20s and I want to do something different and I'm not sure. What do you think? And we continue those conversations. It's okay. But also another one of my students the other day came from outside the US, economics major. Pat, I love film, but when I asked them, are you thinking of maybe exploring a minor at your alma mater? No way. Film, cooking school. I think my parents are going to be having a hard time for saying that they financed this expensive American diploma. I'm going to focus a lot more on economics and a lot more maybe on innovation and entrepreneurship as a minor. Just sharing one student who's a junior's words. How do you de-risk that as a devil's advocate as you help them reevaluate on a monthly, quarterly, or yearly level? How do you mitigating risks and what the next step or the next steps might look like from the academic life, the personal life, and the work life, and this word called diversification, but on a more de-risked manner. I'm going to move on a little bit more from the family business to this other, the investment side, family offices. A family, many of you on the screen, the family office is a more systematic, team-driven approach on managing some of your net worth. I mentioned earlier, I don't care what that net worth is. If it's $10,000 or 10,000 lira, and I know 10,000 lira won't get you many ice creams, to billions of dollars. It's the same approach taken on, what? We have some excess capital. And from a diversification side perspective, whether I'm an individual who has just opened up a small restaurant in my new hometown on Main Street, and how do I better manage that worth in a way that I can build, call it a safer 8% return. And from those returns, what percentage of that money is used for personal uses? What percent of that might be redistributed to one or more old or new businesses, or to grow this personal portfolio that I can take some capital out on a more liquid level, as I might be buying a first-time home, or as I might be helping one or more kids with their education or their first business, or they're getting married. Or guess what? Thinking about security on a retirement basis, not only for my wife as we get older, but for many of the generations, including some of you on the phone who have very young grandkids, thinking selflessly as you've always have for multiple generations, including generations that we might not meet in this lifetime. And I'm going to talk again about words that I've mentioned already, from selflessness and integrity and values and continuity on the multi-generational. I'm going to go back to some of those slides I talked about. Discretion matters. And guess what? We talk a lot about users and empathy. And have you spoken to the kids? Even if you haven't seen the kids in a while, we're all from different generations. The youngest member, some of the younger generations, including Gen Z, their sincerity, their sophistication, as the apples don't fall far from the trees, is just amazing. And I'll start it off more from not my family relationships, but just being a teacher. I cannot thank enough these kids on how entrepreneurial they are as it relates to what their next steps are in the classroom or outside, from a business, investment, and nonprofit level. And as you all know, how sincere they are with their continuing successes on helping the world, but call it one individual at a time, rather than trying to end famine with one, call it waving of the wand. And let's get a little bit more in getting started. I This diagnosis is something I would take years on an individual level. But let's go back to what I was just talking about earlier. Everything starts off with a conversation, assessing who's involved from the stakeholders, understanding their needs. How many generations might be involved in that first conversation or second or nth conversation? It takes time as you're building trust and as you're learning more about the problems before you can even recommend a solution, rather than these too many service providers who just give you that canned volume solution. Not for me, not for many of you in the room, but I'm not pointing fingers. It's a big world out there. There are a lot of different problem solvers, but I wanted also you to remember that, call it slick car salesman, or restaurateur who is just interested in short-term wins. I don't believe in that. And you going back, you have to watch out. And then I'll leave you on that slide also on a generational level. How many of you have heard that? Mom, dad, uncle, aunt. I loved growing up in the family business, but my passions and interests are not there yet. I'm happy to maybe serve informally on one board or helping out if I have time. But guess what? I'm going to med school. So I've got this other priority. Doesn't mean that I'm closing the door, but let's revisit this as life is a long marathon. And then don't be afraid to ask questions. I think sometimes within our own families or our own classrooms or our own boardrooms, there's always that fear. And that fear sometimes, as Professor Eisenhardt said, of, if I converge too quickly, do I just have to follow consensus? No. And don't be afraid. I'm speaking, I know sometimes that's easier said than done, depending on how many family members are in that crowded backyard or on that Zoom screen. But there are also people internally in the family or outside that are willing to help you, and they can act as the scapegoat or as this consigliere in a very simplified level. And also sometimes within this family office world where you're building the A team for families that want to build this, sometimes at a minimum where your net worth is 9 figures or is $100 million. $100 million. And sorry, something just went wrong with tech. And let me look at my time. It's just to make sure I don't run over. But you may not be able to do it all internally. So interview a lot of people. Talk to other family businesses. Talk to other family offices as you interview a bevy of local, regional, national, and global potential advisors. Research. Get those 3 quotations, no different if you're doing work to your house. Test them, get to know each other before you plunge in with a wrong advisor. And irrespective of how slick their slide deck is, as they're saying, we're vertically integrated and we can do everything. I hear that a lot, you hear that a lot. Let's start off on building a relationship first. Equally within building that portfolio, oh my goodness, it can get very complicated on the bottom up level. Privates and publics in today's world still, if I had to use one generalized, areas of investment from private equity, no different than the last 12 months from especially the growth equity and lower middle market. What does that mean for more alpha as you invest capital led by the US first? But then other parts of the world, whether it's India or China or Japan, developed versus developing countries, backing that in on venture, a lot of within real assets, infrastructure, and particularly the additional tailwinds of residential real estate and an industrial over shopping malls and hotels. And then finally, unfortunately, even more attention driven on special situations or credit. And part of that going back to March 2020. Capital has become a commodity. There are too many first-time managers, first-time SPAC professionals, call it fundless sponsors. There's so many buzzwords, and equally, whether domestic or international, it doesn't matter. I could say that the world is going to more specialists, but there are also too many generalists out there. Do your homework, take your time, speak with people who have done this. And there's no pressure on having to figure out all the answers, all the solutions in the next 30 days or the next 30 years. But at a minimum, no different sometimes on a good index fund run by a name which is easy to access. You can get the numbers don't lie historically and going forward on clearing that 8% minimum capital preservation. And then the rest of it, do you want to take more risk? Do you want to take less risk, as maybe getting more into mid-teens return on those portfolios? And then there's also some additional costs. If you're at 100 million or more in net worth, as you're building out a team, back office, technology, regulated, tech, privacy, you can build that equally from a team level, no different if you're building your next charter bank or your next equity crowdfunding platform. And watch out, I don't want to digress on the Jobs Act, where the ceiling just got raised. Are we essentially telling retail investors, no different than what was happening on Reddit, take your paycheck, family business one, and just go to the casino, and maybe your odds are just as good on an equity crowdfunding platform, let alone 7 years ago, where some of these equity crowdfunding platforms were not regulated. I don't know what that means. But then let's now jump in very quickly into the impact side. Some of the brands, some of the for-profits and nonprofits that I've been fortunate to get involved in, food and beverage supplements, but in a meaningful manner where integrity matters, from Tanzania to New England, a marketplace that helps to better connect fishermen directly to restaurants, not customers, to nutritional supplements, but where product integrity over decades has been first and foremost, rather than having a lot of money and points of sale and it being just a cheapened marketing or labeling game, to education from India and Brazil and China coming to UMass Lowell or to Wharton or LBS, to one of my home countries and some of their portfolio companies through an incubator, from fintech, from CRM, to connecting investors and funds on a both fund and direct level, but with getting rid of all these intermediaries. From my hometown of New York City, while I was still in grade school, New York Cares, and then I talked a little bit more about my World Bank and IFC roots. And then, as many of you have different areas of research or expertise, across everything we've talked about, from the operating business to the investment portfolio to your not philanthropic or volunteer activities, there's still been an absence of KPIs, key performance indicators, or targets. And there's a lot of lip service. There are too many research firms. We talk about the importance of primary research. Those research reports are stale as we get into the next minute of this conversation. But as anybody, we haven't been able to really develop a uniform set of a scorecard that everybody around the world, irrespective of how old or how young or how experienced or whether they're just getting started, are adopting. And when I talk about impact in some of my classes or some of my investments or some of my businesses, I like to take a step back and sometimes use this as just a conversation starter from some of more of the bottom-up KPIs that really matter. And then if you've just started, let's revisit these KPIs 3 months from now, a year, 3 years, 10 years. And when somebody calls me or tries to email me with a cookie cutter solution, I don't know who they are, I take a step back and I ask myself or ask them, tell me, have you ever worked or studied or lived in India or in Indonesia or in Estonia? And you can see very quickly too many people who have never spent a day doing what they say they've done, have no track record, have no team continuity, and have less empathy. Just some of the caveats as do your homework first. And I think I'm going to end it soon. But my last aspect, my food for thought, as I learn from all of you, and as I'm the new kid on the block, in this last 12 months in the classroom, teaching that classic starting a new venture, ideas and impact, innovation or innovation framework classes or family business. We're in a world where through a hybrid setting, as I'm in the classroom in a very safe setting, and most of my students are in different corners of the country or the world, but synchronously, not asynchronously, because I teach applied classes. My students love that ability to build a safe virtual classroom and listen to one another first, maintain respect, share experiences, provide constructive criticism as they diverge and converge, and then do a lot of simulations, a lot of group work. Where I weave in a little theory, but I use that theory a little bit more on readings and video before class happens. And I love real world group work exercises, which not surprisingly, as I talk about Generation Z, these bright 18 to 22-year-olds spans ESG from not, I want to climate change from the top down, but pieces of that, whether it's food waste in your cafeteria at UMass Lowell or BU, or whether it's social justice and refugees camps, which are very different in Turkey than they are maybe solving homelessness or helping the homeless in San Francisco. And I want to say merci or shukran and thank you, and really turn it over to all of you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. So question time, folks. Anybody questions, comments? Let's see what we got. Okay, Joshua Mogaka. My name is Joshua Kengere Mogaka from Kenya. Very insightful indeed. Question: how can one embrace the three-circle model in team, integrity, and trust?
Sure. Thanks, Krishna, and thanks, Joshua. I think it really starts off with sitting down, Joshua, on who's at the table with you. And let's break that down first between family members and call it, let me bring a simple piece of paper. Let's break that down across who those key actors are, those key leaders, the soft voices and more the extroverts. And then let's juxtapose that also who the external stakeholders are. And Joshua, let's go back historically on what that's meant. Have we always had that trust? Or is there a new member of the family or a new non-family member that's trying to chip away or destroy what was built, very sincerely over a while? And this is just some layman's advice. Before you step into processes and governance and quarterly meetings, or sometimes bringing in Krishna and Ashwin, maybe as non-family members to act as your consigliere or advisors. Just some quick tips.
Okay. Question from a comment from Gajanan Subnis. Let's communicate when you have a chance. I'm from India, USA, and I know a lot of individuals from Lebanon in UAE. We need to connect all these entrepreneurs together.
No, it's what we talk about. I'm privileged through the two gentlemen who invited me today to meet all of you. And I think that's what it's first. It's that collaboration in a meaningful fashion rather than a transactional mentality, which life is too small. And thank you for those comments. And yes, the Lebanese diaspora, just like many of us from our native countries, where the UAE continues to get a big piece of our brain drain, just because there is very little opportunity in Lebanon, where we have so many other geopolitical or structural risks. But thank you. And my email is very easy. It's it's first initial last name @gmail. If any of you want to ping me.
Okay, let's see. Any other comments, questions from the audience, folks?
Yeah, Krishna, if I may ask a question to Patrick.
Go ahead.
Please.
Yeah, so Patrick, can you give some, call it a prediction or your projection in terms of what COVID-19 is going to do or has done to the family business going forward, or there won't be any impact, positive or negative? Can you share that, some of your opinions about that?
Sure. I'm going to try to give you a personal perspective, a very quick summary of the last 12 months. And I'm not one to look at the past a lot. And I'm happy that all of us are smiling more thanks to all these wonderful people in the sciences who are continue to keep us healthy, all the way to the retailers, people in retail who have been at the till as we've needed all these things to keep us alive. But I'm going to take you back to March 15th, a Sunday of last year. Even a week before that, everybody's meetings kind of got delayed or canceled. For about a month from mid-March to mid-April of last year, everybody, a lot of the families that I interact with are my students, were taking a step back to revisit their house, and their house from, if I can use that analogy, of their one home or their one business to much more complex homes or businesses and investment portfolios and philanthropies or nonprofits around the country or the world. But 30 days later, the show must go on. And from the ability to stabilize in businesses that were more B2B or residential real estate, where we didn't have the answers and we didn't know if our tenants needed some additional support, including sometimes workforce housing domestically or abroad. I mentioned community. You're there to help your tenants and your customers, not to milk your portfolio and add more debt, because debt is cheap. But for the most part, the show went on, and it went on where, led by B2B and residential real estate, the businesses are continuing to execute just as well, and growth has picked up over the last 12 months. But let me give you the reverse of that. I spend part of my day in hospitality, and from the first time or the repeat global restaurateur and hotelier, they were pinched hard. And what does furlough mean? Or what is getting, some support from, the CARES Act? Or guess what? There is no CARES Act in Lebanon or other parts of the world. And we're also having increased geopolitical risks. That's hurting. And the hospitality industry is still hurting. So, you look at the tailwinds, B2B, delivery models, communications tool, workforce housing and residential real estate over others, and infrastructure from family businesses. The operators of those family businesses have had a banner year. But if they can, many of those families, empathetically, even a year ago, the ability to not think about their own interests and their own employees, but to continue to redistribute to communities and help others who weren't as fortunate. That's my quick summary, where none of us have stopped working. Dating back to last March, where I thought 2 weeks into the pandemic, I thought I had never been as educated as I ever have been in my life. 12 months later, I still feel like a freshman. I've never been as busy teaching or working hybrid while I haven't been on a plane or a train. And I think the same for many of you. We've been fortunate, and all of us working or teaching from home, that experience is not created equally across others who don't have all these other luxuries. But in short, yeah, it's been 12 months of continuing to execute on a focused level, focusing on the core businesses, philanthropies, and the core portfolio, rather than trying to take too much risk, and sometimes also postponing new businesses or maybe slowing down investment in growth on a more diversified level, given additional risks of COVID. But what I love best is, and I think many families in the same way, the ability to help, educate, and serve. And that's on a quick generalization in a short time frame.
Great, thank you,
Okay.
Patrick.
Joshua would like a copy of your slides, so I guess he sent his email. So something that we can follow up with. That's fine.
If Joshua, if you can send us an email, ge2@uml.edu, that would be great. As a matter of fact, Patrick, if we can put the last slide on, there's an email address on that one.
Great.
Ashwin, I follow your lead, and again, the most important slides are the hello. Let me introduce myself and the thank you.
Well, looks like I think we don't have questions for today. So Ashwin.
Patrick, can you put the last slide, please? Yes.
Sure, absolutely. My bad manners. Sorry. This is what.
Thank you.
This is the most important slide.
So thank you all for attending this webinar, very interesting topic. Thank you, Patrick, very much for providing your perspective on family business 2021. Thank you so much, Krishna, for hosting this webinar. Our next webinar will be March 29th, and it will talk about another interesting topic related to the COVID-19. It's the future of work, and it will be a very interesting webinar as the faculty from UMass Lowell has done a tremendous amount of research in this area, and he will present the future of the work. We will have our recording of this webinar on our website. Please visit the website www.uml.edu/ge2. Thank you so much again for attending it, and thank you, Krishna, very much.
Yeah, thank you, Ashwin. Thank you, Patrick. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. This has been terrific. So
Thank you, everyone, and a happy and healthy weekend to everyone.
Sure, everybody. Yeah.